Well, the St. Louis Blues have signed defenseman Cam Fowler to a 3-year, $18.3 million contract extension. Was it a good deal? Did the Blues sign him for too long, or will they be paying him too much money for this contract? How long can Fowler keep performing like a top pair defenseman? And what does this extension mean for Philip Broberg, Logan Mailloux, Colton Parayko? What does it mean for the Blues' future as a whole? We're going to talk about all that and more today on Note News. Welcome into Note News. We're a St. Louis Blues podcast. It's John and Alec back with you as always. If you're new to Note News, we go live twice a week talking all things Blues. You can find us on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. We'd appreciate follows and subscriptions on all those platforms. You can leave ratings and reviews as well. Like this video, and then you can follow us on socials, Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok at Note News Pod. But we're here today to really just dive into this contract extension. The news broke last night. We're here recording on Sunday evening, September 28th, here in the middle of preseason. But the news broke last night, sort of in the middle of the Blues' third preseason game, that they have extended defenseman Cam Fowler. So this is some of the bigger news, I would say, of the offseason, if we can still consider this offseason. I guess we're sort of more into preseason mode right now, but it is pretty decently big news. So we're going to sort of dive into the implications of this deal. But just to go ahead and give the info on the deal itself, and then Alec, I'll throw it to you to get your thoughts. I mentioned at the top, it's 3 years. It's $18.3 million total. So that's an average annual value, or AAV, of $6.1 million. So this is adding 3 years onto his existing contract, which takes him, so that's 4 years in total. So that'll keep him, this will keep him signed basically through the 2028-29 season. He'll be 37 years old at the end of it. And then another important note about the contract is that it includes a no trade clause. It's got a full no trade clause until January of 2029. So for the last half a season of this contract, it will then move to a 15 team no trade clause. So a 15 team modified no trade, I should say. So that's the deal itself. Yeah, 3 years and 3 years by 6.1 million. Alec, what was your sort of, I guess, first reaction to the deal itself? And we can sort of dive into, as I said, all the implications of it.
Yeah, first reactions were pretty surprised. I think this is a deal that carries a lot of risk, and I think the sticker shock is kind of getting to me a little bit, just given how much the cap is rising and everything. 6.1 million isn't going to be 6.1 million even next season, but still how it seems kind of a lofty price to pay for an aging defenseman, and especially with that no trade clause. I would say initial reactions are a little bit trepidatious, just about how we've seen this story play out before, and it hasn't gone well in St. Louis. Now, I don't think this is the same situation at all. Cam Fowler has shown that he can do it in St. Louis, versus in the past that wasn't the case. So I think that there is a lot of good that could be taken from this deal, but it's a big risk, and I mean, let's get into the discussion. I think there's a lot of meat here.
Yeah, for sure. Alec coming at us with the big words. He said trepidatious. That's how he's feeling about it. That's good. Um, yeah, so this definitely is, there is kind of like a sticker shock to it. Um, and it is somewhat of a risk. But I guess my first reaction to it was a little bit of the same as you were saying, a little bit surprised by both the term and the total payment, right, of 18.3 million, or 6.1 AAV. It does seem pretty steep. Um, I would have preferred if they could get him on a deal like that for 2 years, um, or if they could sign him, for 3 years by 4.5, 5 million. But the reality is he earned a contract like this last year, right? After he was traded to the Blues in December for relatively little for what they ended up getting out of him. He played 51 games for them and had 36 points between 9 goals and 27 assists, and then obviously had a huge playoff series, 7 games played and 10 points between 2 goals and 8 assists, setting a franchise record for points in a single series by a Blues defenseman. So, had a big year, and I think was pretty central to the Blues turnaround. Um, it was sort of him and Montgomery that I think really lit a fire under the Blues and sort of catalyzed some improved play. I think it really started with the top pair of Colton Parayko and Cam Fowler. They played a huge role in turning the team around, and that couldn't have happened without him. And so I think last year he played like a $6.1 million defenseman, maybe even a little bit more than that, at least in today's NHL. It's just I think the big question is, will he continue to play that way? And it's the nature of NHL contracts. You're paying when you sign a player to a deal like this, whether it's an extension or via free agency, you're kind of paying them for past performance. That's all you can really do. And um, a lot of players or a lot of teams are able to sort of negotiate maybe a smaller deal. But truthfully, I think the Cam Fowler of last year earned this. My sort of hesitation with it is just mostly the length more than anything. I really don't mind paying him $6 million. It's just doing it for 3 years rather than two. Um, but yeah, I mean, like, do you have any thoughts on the term or the AAV? What would a good deal have looked like to you? If you were the GM.
3 years is about the limit of what I think
Sure.
is realistic for a Cam Fowler deal, and or is at least like without getting into just absurd deals beyond that. And even then, I don't know that 3 years is the number that I would have preferred to have settled on. I think that's a that's a long time to be paying a player into his age
37.
37 season. Yeah. So that's a lot. I know defensemen typically age more gracefully than forwards, but
Sure.
even then he's still getting up there even for the defenseman aging curve. And hopefully 6.1 won't look like 6.1. I know Doug Armstrong talked about, I can't remember where I heard this, but Doug Armstrong did talk about how pretty much every year now he said a a bad deal can turn into a good deal just with the rising cap and everything.
Hmm.
So I think they're kind of banking on that. And it's a bold move. I'm in terms of the AAV, I guess it's probably about right for what Fowler's shown. It's not as heavy into the projections, which worries me a
Yeah.
little bit. That's where I think this deal could end up on the wrong side of successful performance. But like you said, he did have that playoff series where he was like the best defenseman in Blues playoff hockey history. So that also does speak for itself. And I definitely, credit to his agent. I think he did the right a great job at figuring out how to manufacture this. Um, it's a risky deal for sure, and I mean his ice time is still up there, so he's still playing heavy minutes. So it's not like last season we saw any inclination of decline coming. It's just sort of you feel like it's coming with the point in his aging curve where he's at. So in terms of the term in the AAV, it's about at the highest possible end at what I would think is acceptable. I
Yeah.
think it is acceptable, but also I think it's super risky.
I agree. I agree on the point that it is at the high end of what would be acceptable for a guy like Fowler. Um, but again, if he continues to play at the level he played at last year, or at least or even slightly worse than that, I think it's a good deal. Um, I don't really have any concerns about him for this upcoming season. maybe not really for the season after that, but it's those remaining 2 years where it's sort of okay, is he going to age more like fine wine, um, or will his his age 36 and 37 seasons hit him more heavily, hit him more quickly. I think that's the big question for me. So yeah, I really would have preferred. I really would have preferred 2 years more than anything. I don't mind the term so much, just mostly due to a few different factors. Right? It's the rising cap. It is other things like the fact that they've only had to pay him. They're only going to have to pay him $4 million this upcoming year, and last year as well. So he is making less money. The player is, because Anaheim was paying 2.5 million of his $6.5 million contract, and they'll continue to do that. So Fowler is making less money. So he is. I mean, he is taking a pay cut, and I bet that was a big factor in the negotiations. Was even at 6.1, it is a lot less, or maybe not. I mean, it's a lot to a guy like me, and to most people, but maybe not in the grand scheme of things in the NHL. But he is making less money than he was. I'm sure that played a factor. Um, so for some of those reasons, I don't mind the pay so much. But again, it's just that term that worries me more than anything. He isn't quite 34 yet. I sort of lump him in the same group as some of these other veteran defensemen on the roster, right? Like Parayko, but Parayko is much better than most of the other vets on the roster. But just like the Falks and the Lettys and the Krugs of the world, I think I'm not alone in saying that I sort of lump him together with them. But he's actually he's younger than you'd think. He's younger than those guys. So he's 33 right now. Maybe not a lot younger, but I don't know. I kind of thought he was already 34 and getting close to 35 in my head, not too long ago. But he's 33. He'll turn 34 in December, and he'll just have turned 37 halfway through his last season. So it's not horrible. There's older defensemen in the league that are productive, right? You've got. I mean, help me out here. I mean, Brent Burns just signed a contract with Colorado. He's like 40, right? So he's been a decently
True.
productive player for the past couple seasons, and so even at 37, I think Fowler can still be a productive player. It's just a question of how long can he keep up what he was giving the Blues this most recent season. And then the other thing that concerns me, and it's not a huge concern because I don't really see the Blues needing to take advantage of it with their current competitive window. But just the fact that they gave him another, they handed out another no trade clause. It seems, I mean, it is pretty common for a player to sort of have earned that security the way Fowler did, when they play like Fowler has, to have earned that and to be given that. So you know I don't think that the Blues are going to run into an issue with it, but I've said that before and been wrong. I would have maybe preferred if that last year, that whole last year, was like, either a 15-team no trade, or if they could have negotiated that going away at some point, entirely. But I don't know. Those are some of my thoughts on the contract. Not really worried about the AAV so much as I am about that last year, and then just some of those clauses. But do you have any thoughts on any of those things that I just mentioned?
Um, I mean, yeah, I think I just have a lot of, like you said, the no trades really do conjure an image of the Torrey Krug and Justin Falk deals, which turned out to be failures for St. Louis. Cam Fowler, this is not the same situation at all, but there is just a lingering fan side in me that's like, can't forget what happened. And I guess that's where my worry comes from. So, yeah, just to echo your sentiment.
Yeah, for sure. And To be fair, I've seen some comments out there that sort of like this is a lot like the Falk and Krug deals, or Letty and Scandella, or some of the other comps I've seen as like a left-handed guy who plays well alongside Colton Parayko, and then earns an extension and then looks bad after the extension. I think Fowler is easily better than those players, so I'm a lot less worried about the drop off when it comes. Um, I don't really see it coming very soon. Like I said, I think he's younger than a lot of people think. I don't know. I think that's a bad comp. Just the salary itself and sort of the nature of the extension. I understand that it sets off a lot of alarm bells in some Blues fans' heads. But I think he's a better player than those guys. Pretty easily in my mind. I don't know. I could be wrong, but do you have any? What are your thoughts on sort of those comps and how he compares to other, veteran, older-ish defensemen that the Blues have extended before, and um, much to the chagrin of a lot of Blues fans.
Yeah, no, it's not the same at all. Just because Cam Fowler has already shown and proved it in St. Louis versus Torrey Krug and Justin Falk were brought into St. Louis as like we thought they could be missing pieces, and that's not how that played out. And same thing with Nick Leddy, um, at the helm. And I guess Scandella. I don't know. Scandella, that comp doesn't make any sense for a number of reasons. I would think. But yeah, I think that there's a lot more to like about this deal. I think that while the no trade clause is attached, it is something you can get around, and it isn't quite as it's not like this is a 6-year deal that's going to be chaining the team down for, well, 6 years, or at least the length of the contract being much shorter does give the team flexibility to where if they want to potentially get out of it, there's probably a way to do so with even with the no trade clause. There's probably a way to figure that out on Fowler's side. So I guess I'm a little bit less worried about it, just because I think that there's I don't know. I think that there's reason to be hopeful for what Fowler can still offer to this team given what he's shown so far at such a high level, um,
Yeah.
that it feels a lot different. It's bringing on someone that you know that you're comfortable with, that's comfortable with the system, that likes playing in St. Louis, that you know can help in St. Louis, versus adding someone new to the fold that you hope will fit in and mesh. Someone
Mhm.
that has an established rapport with your coach already and works well with the core already, versus bringing in an entirely unknown part of the roster. I think it's totally different. So
Yeah.
I am a lot more hopeful, I think, than the Krug and Fowler deals, even though I do think there is some residual just like weirdness about it given how it went last time.
Yeah, there definitely is a little bit more of a sense of security, like you said, having already seen how he meshes with the rest of the team. Um, and I think the fact that he did so well, yeah, should assuage a lot of concerns, both on the ice, um, with Colton Parayko, as his line mate or whatever, up there on the top pair. I think they were just fantastic together. They just complemented each other so well. And we've sort of used this analogy before, but they just kind of fit like a couple puzzle pieces, right? Where you've got one guy um, who's a little bit more offensively minded in Cam Fowler, and really can tally up the assists. I think that's sort of his best trait, is generating primary assists. Whereas Colton Parayko, on the other hand, is much better defensively and a bit more of a goal scorer. So um, I think they just play together so well. But then also they have signed Montgomery to a 5-year contract, right? So Fowler will be playing under Montgomery for the duration of his extension, assuming he's with the Blues the entire time. Um, and is he kind of fits the mold of a Montgomery style defenseman better than anyone on this roster, right? I mean, he and Parayko both, I think do a really good job of playing in Montgomery's system. This is something we've really talked about a lot recently, as we've previewed the season, talking about what could be in store, for a full season under Monty. But he just fits so well with how Montgomery likes his teams to play hockey, and so um, I think for those reasons, it is a little bit less concerning than, like you said, signing a guy sight unseen and just hoping he can fit in, um, with what you've already got. We know Fowler can fit in pretty well with how the Blues are currently constructed. So yeah, I don't think that should be as big a concern, like you said, as it has been in the past. Um, my next question has to do with sort of the timing of this deal. So it kind of caught us off guard, right? It came in sort of the middle of the preseason here. I I don't know which way I would go. I think I would probably say I would have preferred if the Blues had finished or had waited to sign this deal until the season had gotten started. See how Fowler looks after a summer of rest. I mean, he looked really great last year. Obviously, was sort of the MVP of that first playoff series. But I probably would have preferred, if they had gotten to see how Fowler looked this season. We have talked a lot about how the Blues need to get off to a good start. So there's motivation to be playing well early on. Um, but I mean, on the other side of that coin is the player has to be willing to negotiate during the season too. And it's very feasible that Fowler and his camp could have. I'm not saying that I've seen a report or anything. I'm just saying it could be the situation that Fowler and his camp were like, we only really want to negotiate in the off season, so it's either we can really try to get it done now, or we try to sign a new deal once he's a UFA. So I think between those options, if they knew they wanted to keep him around, this is the better option, because you don't have any other teams potentially driving up the price. Um, but if he would be willing to negotiate in season, I would have preferred if they had waited a little bit. But what are your thoughts on sort of the timing of the deal when it was signed?
Yeah, definitely. I think you hit the nail on the head. It feels like a deal that didn't need to get done right now versus guys like Holloway and Broberg still remain unsigned and their price is only going to go up. It feels like the deal that didn't need to happen in the time that it did. But that's not the world we're living in. So all we can do is take what they give us. Um, so I think that the timing is pretty questionable of just like why at this point in the season did they choose to go for Fowler to lock him up versus like seeing it even if he has a slow start, if you can still see signs of the old Fowler in there. I don't think Fowler and his camp necessarily had all the leverage in the world here to guarantee something like this was happening. So I think it's kind of a miss by the Blues front office. But it's not like that. It's not like a terrible miss that's going to set them back a huge amount or anything, or really going to put this team into a just awful position that they can't recover from. It's not like that at all.
Hmm.
I think it's more so just that the organization didn't really have to make this move, and um, the fact that they did gives a lot of leverage to Fowler's camp. So yeah, I think it's just a good job from Fowler's agent really to get this deal done. And on the blue side, they knew they wanted their guy and decided that now was the time to do it. So who are we to tell them they're wrong?
Yeah, I mean, for what it's worth, I think it's a good fit. Obviously Fowler liked to be in St. Louis, and the Blues really liked Fowler as well. So I mean, considering what they gave up to get him and what they've been paying him, they're only paying him 4 million, like I mentioned. Um, Considering those two things, um, it's almost like it's just sort of balancing out, right? It all comes out in the wash or whatever. So I don't know if there's anything like that to it. And then the last thing I wanted to mention before we sort of pivot to talk about the implications of this deal are just sort of uh, the other names that will be UFAs soon, and whose contracts might be coming off the books soon. This upcoming summer, the UFAs. I mean, Cam Fowler just left the list, so the list has shortened to Matthew Joseph, Alexei Toropchenko, Oscar Sundquist. Those are the pending UFAs for the upcoming summer. Not a lot of money coming off the books. This is assuming obviously they don't extend these guys, but Matthew Joseph is making just shy of 3 million, Sonny 1.5, and Torpo just over 1.5. So, that sort of helps pave the way. And then in a couple of seasons, you've got the Falcon Crew contracts coming off the books. Jordan Bennington will also be a UFA. I'm kind of thinking now, this is a conversation for a later date, but I'm kind of thinking he'll stick around. Suter's contract comes off the books as well. So there's enough coming off the books in the near term summers that I don't think this kind of deal should prevent the Blues from signing other important extensions like that Broberg and Holloway point that you brought up. It is a lot, but I think the cap management itself on the open market, I feel like Fowler could have gotten more than this. So, it's it is what it is. I don't know. I feel like if you had asked me what is the most you would have paid him, I would have said 6 million. So I mean, the fact that it's right around there is fine. But yeah, those are some of my thoughts on the contract itself. But
Yeah,
so those
it really
are some of
feels
the other
like
contracts coming off the books.
it really feels like the ways that this deal goes wrong are at this point very much nitpicky things. Like, I personally would have gone more in like the 5 to 5.5 million range, but it's like, are we really? Is it going to really set this team back to have him paid 5.5 million versus 6.1 million? Like, if we're being honest about ourselves, I know the Blues are in kind of a tight cap situation right now, but is that amount really going to mess with the futures of some of these players in St. Louis? I don't think so. And like you said, with the contracts coming off the books, they they are set up decently well for the future anyway. So I'm I think the negatives of this deal are really just sort of ticky tack nitpicky things that like don't really don't really feel the same. I hate to go back to what we were saying before, but don't really feel the same as like a Falk or Crew deal, to where there's like a lot that can go wrong here. The worst that happens is that Cam Fowler regresses back to like a 35, 40 point defenseman, and he's getting overpaid, but he's still being a productive, probably just good enough for the top line, or like a little bit below what you'd want out of the top line. And you still got Colton Parayko. So it's like the ways that this goes wrong when you really analyze it is that it's just a kind of a letdown versus a total catastrophic blow up in the Blues face kind of move. And if
Yeah.
that's the worst case, then maybe it is a pretty good deal, and it just kind of feels off right now because um, honestly, for me, it's just because 6 and 81 are still waiting.
I think that's a great point. Yeah, just the ways it could go wrong, like you said, aren't catastrophic. It doesn't really feel like so. Yeah, I think that's definitely a good feeling. And the Nathan Walker extension was another one signed recently. I mean, we can't say that the Blues aren't trying to negotiate with Broberg and Holloway. Maybe that is happening. It's just those types of deals are long term, right? Like hopefully they would be signing Broberg and Holloway to max contracts. I mean, I think you and I kind of want to see that or something close to it, right? So
Right.
I think the nature of a larger deal like that, it's naturally going to take a lot longer. And so maybe they are negotiating with them, but if it is the type of situation where they are just kind of devoting their energy uh, to sort of shoring things up around the edges with the Fowler and a Walker and guys like that, I'd be like, what are you doing? Like the future is right there. I would prefer if those deals got done. But I am not there. I don't know what they are and aren't doing, and so I think giving them the benefit of the doubt. I'm sure it is on their list. I'm sure it is something they're working on, but those things naturally just take a little bit longer.
Yeah.
Um, I think now is a good time to sort of pivot to the implications of this deal in other ways. So, I mean, um, my sort of, I think the big question and where we should take this conversation next is what does this deal mean for other Blues defensemen? And I want to start with NHL level defensemen, right? So, what does it mean for his pair mate, his line mate for the foreseeable future? What does it mean for Colton Parayko? And then after that, I think we should get into what it means for some of the younger guys like Philip Broberg and Logan Mailloux, who are kind of, I think, the most promising future of the Blues blue line. But yeah, why don't we start at the top with Colton Parayko? What do you think this deal means for Colton Parayko, who is obviously signed um, one year longer than Cam Fowler is, and so will feasibly continue to play alongside Fowler for the duration of his extension. But yeah, thoughts on how this impacts Colton Parayko?
Hopefully it transitions him into like his top pair sort of best seasons, as Fowler and Parayko just seem to work so well together as a pair that hopefully, this can, the best case would be that they play out the remainder of Fowler's contract as the top pair and just continue to look great together and continue to work well together as we saw last season, which would be awesome. Probably more realistically, that doesn't happen just as perfectly as I would like it to. Probably more realistically, it's Fowler and Parayko have another good year, and then maybe Fowler starts to diminish, and Parayko kind of has to burden some of the load. So maybe he uh, loses some of his goal scoring totals like into beyond next season, but you really see that defensive game of his come back up and become more of a stalwart, almost like Philip Broberg type. But I think with Parayko, I think you're gonna get still solid production regardless of who he's paired with, just because he is that guy and he has been throughout his career in St. Louis. There's a reason why he's so beloved by Blues fans, is for his consistency, is for his continued efforts every like year in and year out. And with Fowler being his partner, you just have such a higher baseline of play. Or really it's maybe not so much a floor raising move, but it's more of a ceiling raising move of what the top
Mm,
pair can be,
yeah.
to being something more dynamic and something more exciting, to where you can get the goals and the assists, to where you can get the primary assists and the secondary, to where you can get the defense and the offense. Um, and so hopefully in terms of what this means for Parayko's career, and probably more realistically too, is that I think we still see a very good baseline level of play. I don't think the floor is going to drop off at all, but really all it does is enable Parayko to be a better player and to be more of the kind of player that Blues fans want him to be, which is producing and scoring goals. So I think what this does is it enables Parayko to greater heights.
Yeah, I think you're probably right, and we got a really good taste of that last year, right? When Fowler came over and Parayko kind of took off, right? So I think there's good evidence of that, as you said, that um, these are two guys that together are sort of greater than the sum of their parts, right? They just complement each other so well, and I like the way you put it that keeping these two together might not raise you know the floor of the top pair, which I think is already fairly high, I would say. Um, but it definitely does raise the ceiling. I think they just sort of mesh pretty well together for a lot of reasons. I don't think we really need to um, exhaust that conversation. I think everyone knows what we saw out of those two last year. So I think you're probably right that um, it is a ceiling raising move for Colton Parayko, and hopefully will continue, as you said, to allow him to play to the best of his ability, because he sort of had a renaissance last year. That's one of the big questions going into this season is, was that a fluke, or can he repeat, and maybe even improve upon that, right? Um, the most amazing part of his season was that he set career highs in both points and goals scored, but only played 64 games. So his pace, this is Pareko, that is, his pace was crazy. Can he play at a similar pace? Maybe not, but can he stay healthy and continue to play at a productive pace alongside Cam Fowler, and maybe even have a in the year end totals a more productive year than he did last year? I think that's a big question, and could have pretty significant implications for the Blues and their playoff chances and their performance in the playoffs. Um, I'm feeling optimistic about it though for this upcoming year. But Colton Parayko is 32. He'll be 33 next May, and so he's about a year and a half behind the aging curve of Cam Fowler. But I think it'll be really really cool to see how these two players sort of age together and sort of grow into the game of their mid 30s together, and how can they continue to complement each other. I think that's definitely will be interesting to watch. I think it also is pretty interesting. I want to talk now about Philip Broberg, right? Because there were times last year when, and I'm pretty sure the only real like times we saw this what was before Cam Fowler came over to St. Louis, but we saw Philip Broberg elevated to the top pair when he was playing so well early on in the season. For I know at least one game. It may have been for a more extended stretch. Um, but I think Philip Broberg, at least in my mind, and I'm obviously a big Philip Broberg fan, I think he is sort of the heir apparent to the top pairing left-handed defenseman slot. Um, and maybe he won't be a top pairing guy for his whole career. Maybe he is more of a second pair type guy. I don't personally think so, but I think there is a chance of that for sure. So I mean, having this guy around for having Fowler around for 4 more seasons. Broberg, I'm pulling up his page now to see how old he is. He is 24. Just turned 24 earlier this summer. So you know that means Cam Fowler is going to be around until Broberg is 2028, right? 27, 28, because his birthday's in June. So I think that is an interesting question. As Philip Broberg ages into his prime, does he take over that top spot from Cam Fowler? Is Cam Fowler does Cam Fowler's being there block Philip Broberg in any way? What are your thoughts on how the Fowler extension impacts Philip Broberg's development and his role in the top four?
It gives Broberg a runway to more playing time down the line because it kind of blocks him in the short term. So it gives Broberg sort of an adjustment period to the NHL, which I think is a really safe way to go about development because he's not going to be taking over Fowler's job anytime soon. And like maybe not this coming season, but the season after is when we could start to have conversations of Fowler versus Broberg on the top pair, but only if Broberg's ready for it. Because at that point, Fowler can still be the de facto first pair guy, even if he's is declining. So it really is a very, very safe floor raising move for Broberg's side of things that I think could have been a part of the discussion and could have been part of the calculus for the St. Louis Blues was to raise the chances of a guy like Broberg being a star defenseman by giving him, excuse me, by giving him a mentor and a uh, player higher on the depth chart who can kind of mentor him and also help Broberg or help Broberg by giving him time to get adjusted to the league, because he's still only in his first, earliest full seasons of NHL play. So I think it gives Broberg a runway to more playing time in an increased role, but it does so gradually. It kind of drip feeds him down to this higher role that we all think he can become, which is a really safe way to go about development. The Blues are really trying to not mess up Philip Broberg. They have a young and exciting defenseman for the first time in however many years, and they're really trying to not mess him up. And I can appreciate that. I appreciate the efforts they're going to try and raise the floor of this thing and make sure that he can become a top pair guy. So I think it only helps Broberg's side of things.
I think I'm leaning the same way. I think there are two main ways that it really does help Broberg out. Firstly, um, it would be really easy without Fowler here for there to be so much pressure on Broberg to be the top pair guy and to like be ready to take over that slot. As a team that is trying to re-enter contention, there could be a lot of pressure, and we've seen many times in many sports, not just hockey, how that pressure can impact a young player like that. It doesn't always work out, and I don't think it's the fault of the player necessarily. It most often I think is fault of the fault of the team for poorly developing them and sort of rushing the timeline. So I think it does sort of, as you said, give Broberg a bit of a runway to age into the player that he will be. If he's ever ready to take over that top spot, it's not something that has to happen this upcoming year or even next year, as that's when Fowler was scheduled to be a UFA prior to the extension. So it sort of takes away that pressure, I think, in a lot of ways. But I think it also, I guess I'll say, I'll add on another reason, as you said, he can be a good mentor to a guy like Philip Broberg. Um, that's definitely there. But the other one that I was really thinking as a big benefit to Broberg is it injects a little bit of competition, right? Because I think Fowler is good enough to be the top pair guy, but I don't think he's so good that Broberg can't take the spot away from him. I think that is a possibility. So it I'm sure will motivate Broberg to, if he wants that top pair spot, to go out and earn it. Um, but I don't think Fowler's the type of player that would make a younger player feel blocked in that way. You know what I mean? I think that there is still a decent possibility that Broberg, as he sort of enters his prime, maybe towards the last couple seasons of Fowler's contract, um, that maybe he's able to take that spot, and then Fowler, if he starts to regress a little bit, might make more sense as a second pair guy anyway. So those are some of my thoughts on how it impacts Broberg. But mostly, I mean, I don't think there really is a big downside for Broberg here. I think um, it's kind of funny how we often just how does this impact Broberg's legacy? What does this mean for Philip Broberg? It's a common theme on here. It's mostly my fault, but I think it makes a lot of sense to have that conversation as they're both left-handed guys or left pairing defensemen. So, yeah.
Yeah.
Um, and then the last one that I specifically want to talk about by name, and then I'll throw it to you to see if you have any others that you want to, any prospects or anything like that. But what about Logan Mailloux? And let me just sort of play out a scenario here, right? Say that Fowler maybe regresses a little bit, maybe Broberg takes big steps, maybe some combination of the two. But say there's a swap, and Broberg takes over that top spot, Fowler drops back to the second pair, and I'm sort of imagining that around the time something like that would happen would be around the same time that Logan Mailloux is ready to be a second pair type of guy. So what could a pairing of Cam Fowler and Logan Mailloux look like? I mean, I feel like that would be an interesting one. It seems very offensively minded, and hopefully wouldn't be a huge defensive liability or anything like that. But if that's the sort of scenario that ends up happening, how do you see a Fowler Mailloux pairing working out?
That's a really interesting conundrum to think about, just because I don't think I don't know. It's hard to imagine a world where they're both playing on the same pair, I think.
Mhm.
But maybe that's just my sort of gut reaction to two offensive defensemen as well as to two guys on such stratified pairs. So I think that's a really fun question. I think Fowler just maybe not so much as the discussion about what would them being on a pair together look like, but more so what would them um what does them being on the same team mean? I
Sure.
think is that there's a lot higher of a chance for a guy like Mayu to hit the ground running and have a successful season um, because of the play of a Cam Fowler who can match his pace and match his mindset of an offensive defenseman. And I trust a lot in Mayhew's ability to develop, but also in Fowler's ability to teach. And I think that's a part of this, like we talked about with Broberg. It doesn't necessarily give Mayhew the runway because they're not the same handedness. They're not next to each other in terms of pair rankings or orderings. But Fowler practicing with a guy like Mayhew can definitely lead to some more creative discussions and ways to learn from each other. And a guy like Fowler, who's been through all sorts of manners of Ducks teams, would really have a lot to share for a guy like Mayu.
Yeah.
So, what would a pair with them look like? It would be fun. I think that's hard for me to answer. I think I would say it would certainly be offensively terrifying to deal with,
Yeah.
and kind of hilariously so. This it's tough to give this comparison. This would be like if Cale Makar wasn't good at defense, but like Devin Taves and Cale Makar, not to that level, but
Right. Yeah.
just going all offense all the way,
Yeah.
um, would be hilarious. Is all I'm thinking, I guess. But yeah, I think having a guy like Fowler stay around to help bring up a guy like Mayu is another really important piece of this. That sort of, if you think about it in terms of the okay, I'm gonna go off on a little bit of a tangent here, but think about how the impact of a guy like Braden Shen has on this team, and
Mhm.
how he's been in trade rumors for however long now. Seems like every trade deadline there's more Braden Shen rumors, and instead he earned the captaincy. He stuck out with the captaincy, and he's brought now him and Fowler play different games, but he's brought that sort of mentor edge to the team and helped bring up young players like Jake Neighbors and hopefully like Jimmy Snuggerud too. Now Fowler can be that for the defense because to have a good seamless transition from season to season to season, you do have to have those veteran presences that know how to deal with the weirdness and the grind of a full 82 game NHL season, especially with now the Olympics being thrown back into the fold. I think that there's a real benefit to having a guy like Fowler on the roster for a Logan Mailloux to help him learn about what it takes to grow in the NHL and what it takes to become a true NHL defenseman that
Mhm.
he couldn't learn from a guy necessarily like Parayko, who is a great lead by example and is a great captain of this team, but I think they offer such different styles of captaincy. I think Fowler's a lot more vocal versus Parayko's a lot more stoic, and also has played around in the NHL more versus Parayko being a full time Blue. I think that offers a lot to a guy like Mayu, who's being brought into a new team, who doesn't know what to expect. When Fowler went through the same thing about 8 or 9 months ago. Uh, Obviously, they're at different stages in their career, but I think so. I'm kind of avoiding your question about what would a pair with them look like, but I
That's
think
okay.
having them on a team together is a really valuable piece of this deal that can't be quantified. That also makes me feel a lot better about the signing itself.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And truthfully, I don't think a Fowler Mayu pairing is super super likely, but it is definitely an intriguing thought experiment. But yeah, I think maybe and this is sort of assuming that no one else rises to take over these spots or anything like that. But or is brought in or signed or traded for. But I think like Fowler Parayko, that's a solid pairing, and maybe in a few years it looks more like a second pair. I don't know. I would hope not, but maybe so. And then maybe Broberg and Mailloux, like you've sort of got more of that um, balance with I think both of those pairings, and maybe you know between those two you've got a pretty solid top four. But yeah, definitely interesting to think about. Next, I want to talk about, and this will sort of be our last main discussion topic. Any other guys? So there are some comments in the chat. Have also mentioned Tyler Tucker, Theo Lindstein, even Adam Juracek. So who else? Who else defensively on the Blues or in the system? Do you think? I mean, does this really block anyone? Like, I'm not really sure that there was anyone ready to take on a top six left side role. So yeah, what are your thoughts on this signing's impact on other defensemen that the Blues have in the system?
Yeah, I agree with that. I think that this is just like taking place at just the right time to where it's not really harming anybody else's development here. I mean, Lindstein is not ready, unfortunately. Same thing, I think with Yidicek could use another year of just full season of play to not get injured, and is also 19 years old, so still has some time to go there. Um, and guys like Leo Liu, for maybe even Malmstrom if you want to throw him in there, or Buchinger.
Hmm.
Buchinger, I always struggle with that name, are kind of quad A guys. Same with like a Matt Kessel. So if you're really blocking the ones who probably aren't going to be sticking around at the NHL level anyways, I'd argue you're not really causing a net negative for the team there. Um, so I'm a lot more. I think the timing of this deal, not in terms of like preseason versus in season, but the timing of this deal in terms of that 30,000 foot view of like how this affects the Blues going forward into future seasons. It doesn't really block anybody, and by that point, you'll be able to slot Fowler down as well. So I think it does make sense from that angle or standpoint to
Hmm.
give him the 3 year deal, to transition him out of the team, and just make sure you have solid defensive play on the blue line for years to come once your other guys are ready, because defensemen typically take a little bit longer to develop than forwards, at least as young players. And so guys like Lindstein and Yudacek and um, who am I forgetting?
Tucker.
Uh, regardless, sorry,
Tucker.
Tucker. Yeah, thank you. That's the other name. They're not quite in the prime of their aging curve yet, and I think about 3 years from now is when we expect them to take on a big role, anyways. Especially
Hmm.
a guy like Yurchek. So I'm more open to the idea that this could be a really positive deal for the Blues when you look at it from that 30,000 foot view of not this season. Like this season, it'll probably be okay, and it won't even kick in until next season, anyways. But when you really think about it, like stepping back and looking at the construction of the defense, it does make a lot more sense that way.
Yeah, I agree. I don't really have anything to add there. Um, just want to get to some news and notes real quick before we wrap up here. Really, mainly the only thing is the Blues have sent some of their prospects down. So going to Springfield, I'm not going to read the whole list, but some of the notable names include Uri Pekarchik, Jakob Stansel. Who else? I mean, Buchinger, whatever you want to say. Will Cranley's been sent down, and then the big ones are Justin Carbonneau and Adam Juracek have been sent to their junior teams. So unfortunately, we will not see Carbonneau in St. Louis to start the season. But more on that later. We're gonna devote more of a future episode to discussing what all this means. But I just want to say, interestingly, Dalibor Dvorsky was not among the names that were assigned. neither was Otto Stenberg. So it will be interesting to see how the rest of their camp plays out. We're going to have a more expanded discussion on that. I just wanted to mention that because that's something that happened today. But we're going to do an episode hopefully sometime soon. Probably more preseason content, reacting to some of the recent games the Blues have played, and then how some of these young players are performing, how some of the NHL guys are warming up, and just general thoughts on the preseason and the upcoming season, which we're getting so close. We're like a week and a half away to the start of the regular season, so we're going to be here hopefully twice a week until we get there, and then definitely twice a week as we get into the season, talking all things Blues. So if you want to join us, we'd love to have you. We like everyone joining live when they can, and then obviously listening or watching after the fact. We appreciate everyone doing that. So we definitely would appreciate if you would subscribe to our YouTube channel if you haven't already. It's the best way to help us out. Like this video. We're on Spotify and Apple Podcasts as well. If you wouldn't mind following, giving us a rating and a review, that goes a long way. And then follow us on socials, Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok at Note News Pod. Post a lot of other great stuff over there. But thanks for joining us this time. We will see you next time. And of course, as always, let's go Blues.
Let's go Blues.